We're just at my studio in Melbourne. So this is a studio that I had first. It's now empty because we're about to move out in a week. And then my actual studio.
Chewing is the first stage of mechanical digestion. Upper and lower molars grinding repeatedly. Enzymes and the wetting contact of saliva begin to break down food.
The performance Intestine in my eye was like a half-hour reading performance, I call it. It was basically performed by me to a small audience in this hotel room. And I read a text that I had written from, I read it from a kind of a printed booklet. And it began with me in a separate room from the audience. I kind of turned off all the lights and they saw me enter this bedroom, and I began by reading the script from a bed. And then I moved into the space that the audience were inhabiting, which was the lounge area, and kind of performed a series of, reading interspersed with some type of choreography or movement in the space. But it was the way that I felt that the way that I was interacting with the space was quite childlike, or kind of reassessing objects that are very banal, like the curtains and lights and things like that. I chose the site of the Supreme Court Library for a number of reasons, but it was quite arbitrary, I guess, in some ways. So domed building at the centre of the law courts. So the law courts are kind of like a square all around. I think there's 11 or 12 courts, and then the library is kind of this monumental dome in the middle of in the building that you can if you look from a bird's eye view, yeah, it's this big breast, which was this thing that I got really obsessed with. And I found it interesting architecturally because it's so badly suited to being a library. All the shelves have to be packed into these weird corners, and the spaces just don't make that much sense. So I was sort of interested in how architecturally it seemed more of a symbol of a library rather than being an actual functional archive for books or something. And then the way I started that project was really just spending time either in the library, kind of looking at their collection of old law books or kind of degraded legal texts, speaking to librarians about the way that I was kind of really interested in the way that the librarians were functionaries of the law to some degree, but separate in a way, really different to lawyers, and that they kind of provided lawyers with this information, access to knowledge, but without fully kind of understanding that system. And so yeah, I was to kind of go there and just write for certain amounts of time, speak to them, and then also go and watch court proceedings. In lots of ways I felt really repulsed by it, and as soon as I had committed myself to making a work there, I was terrified of the idea. But I guess the thing that I find interesting or intriguing about it is to do with this idea of authority. I've thought a lot about security in my work, and kind of these sort of abstract ideas of these kind of political authorities that kind of control and implicate every person in a society within the scope of their power. And I guess particularly this thing is the tension between that and reading and writing, because reading and writing is something that I love a lot on a really kind of emotional level. And so I guess I romanticize that process, and then to see it in tension with these kind of authorities that are powerful and violent and terrifying is kind of interesting to me.
In the hotel, I'm close to the bed the way I'm close to the book, lying down at the edge of waking. I read the law without method, eyeing words I don't understand. Sharp legal phrasing is difficult to pass.
So the way it kind of shifted the project to be performed in the hotel, this kind of hotel service department space across the road, was one to do with like being able to see the architecture from a different vantage. So instead of being inside it, being able to look down on it. And the other was this relationship between the public space of the library and the private space of a hotel room, or kind of more complicated than that, like that the library was sort of public, but then like what you're doing in it is quite private, in that like reading inside your own head is a private space. And then the hotel room is kind of this, it's a private space, but it's actually public because there's different people moving through it all the time. And there seemed to be some tension or something interesting in that I could like found difficult to articulate. So the way that I then started making the performance was just to like I did a kind of like residency for a night in the hotel where I got like different artists and stuff to come in and talk to me about the space, I kind of gave them, I had questions and prompts, and they were really to do with people that I felt would help me like, what's the word, like unlock a process, or like it felt very stuck, I guess. The law thing had made the whole project feel like completely stuck and too heavy, and so I needed to like bring some sort of life and some part of like myself back into it. Yeah. I mean, the library and the law just seemed like I guess a particularly amplified or something version of that, where like what became public and what is private is like in really tense relationship to one another, and like who's in charge of knowledge, who has authority over knowledge, and like what is known.
Then the slurry mass moves through the esophagus to the stomach, protecting itself with a layer of mucus. The stomach releases gastric juices. Its walls ripple to encourage proteins to fall apart. A thick liquid passes to the small intestine, and the absorption of molecular nutrient complicates the question. What is mine?
I mean, often my work is printed in some way, and I'm always interested in that because I think books are really amazing objects and contain kind of a lot within their form. And so the actual thing is based on a weird combination of like amendments in legislation. So when legislation changes in the library, they have kind of like these bound copies of different legislation, and when there's an amendment they just like stick it in, and they're often these things that kind of fold out, these long pieces of paper that don't quite fit in the books, and I was sort of interested in that as a form. And then the kind of layout or typesetting is based on a really old book basically that used this kind of like thing about having footnotes in like the central footnotes were a certain type of footnote, and then the main text was around the outside, and then the footnotes to the footnotes were on the edge, and I found that kind of like multipleness of the layout like really useful because the way I'd written it was so much like a collection of all this stuff. So like being able to like refer out from the text was like really helpful. Like I think the beautiful thing about text is, and books and those kind of objects, is that they travel with people like outside of galleries and into their rooms, and you know, in ways that like art objects can't usually, I mean, unless you buy them. So I like that idea that people like, sometimes people will send me like photos of the texts like in their bedrooms and stuff, and I really like that idea that maybe it's being read far away, like physically and temporally or something. In this most recent performance, I felt like it was really important to to put myself into the work in some way, because of what I was like dealing with, this idea of law and just like it as a violent institution. And I had no idea really how to do that, but I think it began by writing from a first person position, and kind of, I guess, trying to make like what I was talking about the law be really contained, and not trying to make pronouncements about the legal system in general or try to even understand that, just to be talking about my experience of entering that space and what it felt like to be my body going through the security, spending time in the library, digesting the books that I happened to pick up. Like, it was all very incidental and like definitely not kind of like well researched or anything. It was just like trying to understand this system that I'm implicated in, and being very transparent about the fact that it was me doing that and not, anyone else, basically. I was like really, really, really reticent to do that for a long time because I don't know, didn't like the sound of my own voice, and have always felt like very uncomfortable in performance situations, like with my like what to do with this body that I'm attached to or something. But it sort of became so important, like the relationship between the voice and the body became really important in a number of works, that it felt like, it made sense somehow for me to start doing that. And specifically in this in Intestine in My Eye, it really like was the most fun part, was kind of like translating the text that I'd written into performance, which happened very quickly at the end after like a long and laboured writing process. If you cup your ears like this and different, you can kind of hear the way that your voice, because like there's like it travels up here and also resonates inside of your skull. So like physically, like you are hearing a different thing to what everyone else is hearing. I mean, it's really different listening to performance or something like that versus like a recording of a conversation you had with a friend. Because I'm so much more in control, at least to some degree, of the performance, whereas like hearing candid conversation is just so I think it's just, you're used to seeing your reflection and like you're used to photos of yourself and whatever, but there's something like very, very intimate about your voice, and it sounds so different inside of your head to the way it sounds when it's played back to you. It's like just seeing a really honest view of yourself, and that's hard. I feel like there's like a deep psychoanalytic answer to why I'm attracted to like these places of like rule and authority, that I like definitely don't have a full grasp on. But it's they've always been interesting to me. I think it is to do with these things about groups of people, and the way that groups of people react to kind of sets of rules, or like want to participate and be included in something, or act within like ritual and certain kind of set procedures.
Where words fail, she chooses to place faith in her body. Rather than conjuring false language, she imagines the bifurcation of the tongue itself. Though she lacks religious education, the notion that serpentine speech and deceit belong together has lodged itself in all the organs that count: heart, mind, stomach. A, B, will, there.
I've done a number of like different presentations and performances where I'm lying down and the audience is also lying down or is invited to, and it kind of creates this level of intimacy and openness, like that I feel like I'm able to speak differently to how I would sitting upright. I guess at the moment I'm just feeling like it's been a really busy few years, and I haven't had heaps of time to kind of process what I've been making, or like really why those particular things, or that's been very directed by deadlines and outcomes. And so at the moment I'm kind of taking a few months to sort of think through that and like how I want to be making stuff, and feel a bit more like that's being directed by me than just like the opportunities that are put in front of me. It was the alderman's cat, but the lady who lives in the next house along, like she stopped doing it, but she used to feed the cat in the laundry, So she'd just come through, that like she had a key to the house, and she would come in and like put out cat food, and then in the cat, it was like the cat's laundry.
Just like a pimping cat.
Yeah.
Or the cat
We barely pay rent, so it's alright.
Yeah.